And we've got two different segments, as you may recall. And Kurt will get us started with the first, where we talk about the future of banking. And then about 11 o'clock, Representative Mark Pocan will join us, and I will become the big cheese at that point. Okay, Kurt.
All right. Yeah. So this was born out of a conversation on my front porch about kind of where's banking going or where's money going as we move into the more digital age, and everybody's doing stuff remotely. What does it look like? I hit up the president of First Business Bank, who I knew. I've been doing some work. I've done some work with them in the past and still do. And these two gentlemen stepped up to do a talk about what the future of banking looks like. We originally talked last spring, but as the end of the season came along, it was pretty clear people were not showing up as much for the PLATO events. So we kind of called it, and they graciously joined us again this fall. So I'll let you guys introduce yourselves, because I don't really know you guys that well. So
great, thanks, Kurt. Well, I'm going to share my screen here.
You already are.
Oh, perfect.
There
you can see it.
Yep. There you go.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having us. So we're going to, as Kurt said, talk about the future of banking. In just a quick introduction, I'm Alen McAfee. I'm Chief Banking Operations Officer at First Business Bank. So think of me as all things behind the scenes, managing operations of deposits and loans, and then a little bit of loan administration. So really, I'm the one behind the scenes making sure everything gets done, while others are out front, the face of the bank. And Brendan, I'll hand it over to you for a quick introduction.
Hey, thank you, Alan. I'm one of those out front face of the bank people. My name is Brendan Freeman. I'm in the private wealth group. I lead the private wealth group. And I've got about 26 years of experience in this field. It's pretty much all I've ever done since graduating from Marquette in Milwaukee, and have an MBA from Washington University in St. Louis. But I'm thrilled to be with you. And Kurt, thanks for inviting us back. We're glad to be able to talk a little bit this morning, and hopefully have some fun with this conversation while learning a few things. And so I'll tell you a little bit about First Business Bank. If you don't know us, we're a Madison-based, Wisconsin-based publicly traded bank. We're about 30 plus years old. We're right there in the Research Park in Madison. We also have locations in Brookfield as well as Appleton. And then we're in the Kansas City market. We are pretty unique from a banking perspective in that we don't have a large consumer presence. There's no ATM, there's no drive-up window, nothing like that. We work specifically with businesses and business owners. And so that's the foundation as a business bank that works really well with the owners and the families. And we also do work with other high net worth individuals or other private wealth type clients. We're about $3 billion this year. It's been a little challenging, so valuations are down a little bit, but we're about $3 billion in terms of our bank assets, and about $2.5 billion at the present in terms of assets that we manage for our clients. Our clients think of us in a very positive way, we think. The slide shows a very high net promoter score. I don't know if you all have spent any time on net promoter score, but it's how likely would you be to recommend First Business Bank, and we consistently do very well in that category, particularly among our peers. We score out at a 77 with a recent ranking versus other banks that are in the 30 range and 44 range. And so we do quite well with our clients. And the best evidence is we're often brought in to help other businesses through word of mouth, through recommendation, that kind of thing. Relationships are really important to us. From an overview perspective, that's a key strategy to us, working and getting to know our clients extremely well, whether there's businesses or individuals. And you'll see some of that as we go through our presentation. I promise this won't be a commercial for First Business Bank. Well, it's certainly something we know, but we're not trying to convert you all to First Business Bank customers. We would love to help you if there's a need, but this is mainly to provide information today. And so, being that out front guy, I have a hard time not promoting our company because I love it and I love what we do. But we're really not trying to just promote First Business Bank. We're trying to give you some insight from our perspective today. So, Alan, with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Brendan. So what my part of the conversation will be about is really the technology side and what I think the future will look like. So from a digital banking perspective, I'm going to talk about where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. Where we've been, if you look at the history of banking, just not that long ago, everything was in-person interaction. You would walk into a branch location, walk up to a teller, that traditional teller line, and transact. Or you would talk to a personal banker and do something more transactional like a loan or other kind of interaction. And then everything was mailed through the post office. So you would get your statements in the mail. Some might still do that, but it's still a possibility. But that was your typical interaction with a bank. If you look at online banking, it's just about 30 years ago is when Stanford Credit Union first introduced online banking as a website interaction. So that's where you can look up account information through your desktop computer and then to receive your information electronically. So 30 years ago isn't that long. If you switch over to the mobile banking side, Apple introduced the iPhone in 2007. That's only 15 years ago, not that long ago. And that's where everything is now available on your phone. So you can receive bank information through your phone. You can interact with your bank over the phone, see images of your bank statements, your checks clearing, all through the mobile device. I think the key thing here is where we've been, is you can see this rapid pace of technology change. And as I move through these slides, I think what you'll see is there's going to be even more rapid pace of change. So the technology is going to continue to evolve and change the way you interact with your bank. I would also ask yourself, how do you prefer to interact with your bank? I think that will be a theme throughout our conversation. I think there's times where digital, mobile works really well and works most of the time. But if you have a complex transaction, you probably want to talk to a person. It's so much easier to get the job done when you're talking with a person one-on-one. So if we move on to where we are, these are all things that are current in our environment. One of the things that you'll probably see is something called embedded finance. So that is where you're buying something, you're purchasing something either from a website or at a store. And I'm sure you've seen it. Oh, you can do this in 4 easy payments of X at 0% financing. So you no longer have to go to your bank ahead of time, get a loan, and make a purchase. You can do it right there where you're making the purchase, and they'll offer you some sort of financing. And behind the scenes is a financing company or a bank. So what we call that is embedded finance. They're embedding that finance in your purchase or transaction. That's happening today. And once you see that, it's everywhere. I was just on Amazon the other day, and it wasn't really that large of a purchase, but they were saying, oh, you could do it in 4 easy payments of $20. So that's the capability there. It's embedding that right in the transaction. In the middle here, I'm talking about faster payments. The speed of paying each other is increasing. There are things out there called Apple Pay, Venmo, Zelle, and even same-day bill pay through your online banking system. All of those are newer technologies where we can pay each other almost instantaneously. And I will also say soon, early next year, the Fed will introduce a new service called FedNow. It'll just be a real-time payment system where literally if we're all out to dinner, we could, instead of separating out the checks, I could send all of you $20, for example, and it would settle immediately. So that's when I'm talking about faster payments, that's what I'm talking about. Some of these payment rails are outside of the banking system. Like Venmo is a proprietary network where you can share payment. If you want to get into it, you have to connect to a banking account to pull money in or out of that network. So know that some of these are proprietary, some of them are bank sponsored, but the bank will facilitate any number of these depending on which bank you're with. And then the last one I would call cryptocurrency. Hot topic right now, a lot of conversation about Bitcoin. And I think the key thing from my perspective is that cryptocurrency right now is an investment or an asset. It's something you would purchase. You can use it in limited ways to transact, but it's pretty limited, and it's not ubiquitous. So basically, the way I look at this is more of an investment that you would buy into and sell your asset rather than true trading. Now, you can see on the dark web transactions where someone would take over your network, for example, and say, I want Bitcoin to get your information back. So you can exchange Bitcoin that way. But again, it's limited. It's not ubiquitous. So when I look at where we're going, so these are things that are on the near-term technology front that I think are very interesting and probably will change the way we interact with banking. The first one is artificial intelligence. And this would be where the websites are tracking what you're doing, and they'll offer you, for example, you're purchasing something and they'll say, oh, have you thought about this? This is another kind of purchase that we think you might like. How this would impact banking is we would be able to see, oh, if you have 3 accounts, you're always looking at one account. That's the one we'll show first. That's how artificial intelligence could make your life more convenient. And I think the trend is even more of that as we think about interacting both in the financial services industry and in just retail and purchases and everything Google and Amazon. The middle one here is something called open banking, and that's really where historically you would go to your bank and get all things from your bank: a loan, a deposit, a savings account, an investment account, all from one location, probably the nearest one to you. What's happening is those walls are breaking down, and you could go to the bank down the street for a loan, or you could go to an online bank for a savings account and maybe even an investment advisor that's outside of the state. So really the banking walls are coming down, and that's something called open banking. And what we're seeing is there's technology solutions where you could see all separate bank accounts or information in one place. And it's consolidating all of that information. What does that mean to you? It means you can go down the street and find that person-to-person interaction, or you could choose to go somewhere else and consolidate that all into one view. I think that's going to continue. I think the walls are going to continue to come down, and I think we'll be able to go anywhere for financing. And it really is your choice when you're looking for financing or other kinds of traditional banking products. And the last one here is digital currency. As you're aware, the United States is looking to do a digital currency, a traditional fiat currency, meaning backed by the United States government. The interesting thing here is that would be, the way they're building it is that would be issued through the Fed and delivered through a bank. So you wouldn't be able to just go to the Fed and pull down digital currency. You'd have to go through your bank, just like you would go to the bank to get cash today. So different than, notice how that's different than crypto. Crypto, you would go to a site to purchase it and mine it, whereas digital currency you would get through a traditional banking channel. What this would mean in the future is, you kind of see it today, but it would be even faster. You would load that currency in your wallet, potentially on your phone. You'd go to checkout somewhere, say at the grocery store, tap your phone, and you would trade cash right out of your account through digital currency. That's what the future could hold. There's no timeline on this. We're not sure when it will happen, but it's definitely a focus of the US government to put in digital currency sometime in the future. I would be remiss if I didn't talk to you about protecting your information. It's critically important as these new technologies are coming out in the rapid pace of changing technology to protect your personal information. Know that a bank will never call you out of the blue and ask you for your social security number over the phone. And if someone tries to do that, I would hang up on them and call your bank directly to a person you know. We're seeing more and more of this happening where emails are being hacked and they're asking you to input information. I've received multiples of those and I literally have to delete them. And some of them look legitimate. Like they'll come from, for example, UPS saying, please enter your information. I never do it. I always delete them. If I really am looking for a delivery, I would go directly to UPS. Or if I knew I had something critically important with my bank, I would call someone I trust at the bank. So don't share your information over the internet. Only do it on secure websites and share information with people you trust. Just be vigilant about your personal information. You must protect it at all times. I am going to pass it over to Brendan to his part of the conversation, and there'll be room for questions later too.
Great. Thank you, Alan. I assume you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Very good. Well, in a similar way, as it relates to individuals and a lot of the high net worth clients that we work with, or individuals that are living in retirement or who have amassed some wealth throughout their life, that experience has also changed. And so I wanted to talk in a similar way about where we were, where we currently are, and kind of where we're going, in kind of that same format that Alan used. And I would characterize where we've been as a place of formality with often dated information. Where we are is currently a place of transparency and insight. And then where we're going, I'll make a case for some advice and how important getting good advice might be. So thinking about where we've been, I remember when I started 27 years ago, and I remember the experience for private wealth clients was often kind of a routine. It was in many ways very different from today. I remember having lunch in an executive dining room of a big bank tower, and you picture white tablecloth and fine china and servers. And I remember a lot of formality around going through an investment book. And it was quite an experience. We felt like we really needed to hurry with what we're doing, at least in the place where I was working. And it was formal in its routine, and the meetings all felt the same. We felt like there was a rhythm to a meeting. You're building rapport, you're going through the book, you're talking about the economy, you're talking about things like correlation and yield curve and currencies and equity performance versus fixed income performance. And I always felt like it was meant to confuse clients. And I think our clients were kind of just putting up with us in a lot of ways, because we were talking about things that maybe they didn't understand at the time. And some of our clients understood, but a lot of our clients really just trusted us to do what we were doing from an investment perspective. And it was not interactive. It was a lot of talking from wealth management teams and not a lot of listening from our teams. And I feel like that changed. And that changed, as Alan talked about. I can't believe it's only been 15 years with the iPhone as an example. I don't know if that jumped out to you all, but that jumped out to me. Like, what would we do without these things now? But you have so much information today at your fingertips. And so in comparison to what we had just 20 plus years ago, that information was dated. That information was almost as if clients came in and they were waiting to say, okay, well, what's my balance? What transactions did we do? You tell me what that looked like. Whereas if you forward, Alan, to today, things are different. There's a lot more transparency. We make the assumption that everyone knows real time what's going on. If you think about it, if you're an active user of online banking, you'd go do a transaction and not even 5 seconds later, you get a notification, if you have it set up, that a transaction happened in your account. You can check the balance and it reflects that. Similarly, from an investment perspective, it's updated at least on a daily basis if the markets are open. And so the industry and firms like us have changed a lot, where investment performance and account balances are important, but we assume that our clients know that before they visit with us, before they call us, before they come and meet with us, because of that transparency. And where we used to talk about, and it was so important that we were beating a benchmark. How are we doing versus the S&P 500? How are we doing on the bond side versus the Barclays aggregate and things like that? Today, I would say, because of this transparency and because we've evolved as an industry, what's really important is understanding our clients' priorities, understanding their hopes, their dreams, their worries. And where we used to talk a lot, I think one of the best attributes of a really good advisor today is asking the right questions and listening a lot. And so the dynamic has shifted. And for some of our clients, maybe that existed several years ago. But to me, as an individual, I've just noticed that significant change. And with about 35 people on our private wealth team, as I'm coaching and I'm leading the group, I'm always asking, what great questions did you ask? Did you really listen? How much talking did you do versus the client? Because I think you really have to understand what's important and try to get to the heart of the matter. Clients aren't necessarily looking for blind advice because of all the information that's out there. They're not looking for us to tell them what to do. They're looking for collaboration, which is different. They're looking for insight, which is different. And so we assume they have this information. They just want our perspective. What are other clients like me doing? What, with a team of professionals that have 20, 30 years experience, what's your best thinking? And they make a choice of whether or not they want to follow that based on what they know, where it hasn't always been that way. So we'll keep going, Alan, if you don't mind. I think that particularly, we've learned a lot. If you think about the sample size of the last few years, going through the pandemic, and then coming out of the pandemic as quickly as we did from a markets perspective, the market fell within 23 days, and then the market surged as the federal government was putting money into the system, as we were kind of recovering and we were getting an idea of what post-pandemic world was going to look like. During that time, and I would say during the present time, where we've got a war going on in the Ukraine, we've got a very active Federal Reserve with sky-high inflation and interest rates increasing. During both of these times, we've realized that making sure our clients are okay and making sure, while investment performance is still important, but making sure that we have a discussion of what really matters is top of mind for our advisors. And so with all of the volatility that's going on right now, we've, as a private wealth team at First Business Bank, we've boiled it down. Our team got together and we boiled it down to 4 critical questions. And if I'm a listener on this call today, I would maybe write down these questions or become familiar with these questions and ask yourself these questions, because I think there's some insight here. And there's some simplicity to these questions, but there's some insight to quickly assess, are you okay? Are you not okay? So you have to make some changes, that kind of thing. So Alan, we'll go to the next one, which is the first question, which is basically, where are you now? In terms of an investment portfolio, in terms of the amount of liquidity that you have, in terms of your current mix of assets that you have, where are you? What does that currently look like? There's been some volatility. At one point this year, the S&P 500 was down 25%. What's been different about 2022 is that we've also seen a historic drop in the bond market, with fixed income securities being down about 15% for the year. As interest rates go up, bond prices go down. And so that's caused valuations on fixed income funds, securities to go down, which is different because most people think of bonds or fixed income as a safe place within your portfolio, where stocks are usually where you take the risk and you get the growth. And so that's been different. And so asking yourself, where are you right now? What does your asset allocation look like? What does the amount of cash that you have at the present time look like? How does that amount of cash that you have line up with your needs, with your expenses? Some people think, I want to have a year's worth of expenses in cash. For others, that might be 2 years if they want to be more conservative. They worry less about what's going on in the market day to day if they have that cash and they know that they're going to be okay. But doing that assessment of where are you is very important. And I would say another thing that I failed to mention previously is the financial planning element of what we do is so much more important today, to understand all the assets, all the liabilities, the whole picture, so that you understand your probability of potential success with your goals and your priorities. And that financial planning discussion is something we're having with clients every day. Where 20 years ago, we weren't doing that. It was more about performance. That was the most important thing, and the formality that I discussed. So the next question, Alen, if you switch forward, is, are you on track? Simple, you know where you are you on track? This requires that you identify some goals, and it also requires kind of referencing that financial planning. This year, many of our clients have realized that they're still on track. It doesn't look quite as good as it did this time last year when you look at balances and when you look at performance from an investment perspective. But it's important to assess, hey, even with this year, are we still on track? Or do we need to potentially make some changes to get back on track? We've realized very quickly during the pandemic that this question was really critical to understand where our clients were. And while they might be watching the news and seeing declines and getting really worried, and maybe even some of the same this year, to go back to that financial plan and say, well, you're still, based on the income needs that you have and some of the goals that you have, you're still doing quite well. Really important then and now. And so the next question you'd ask is, okay, assuming we know where you are and we have an assessment of whether we're on track or not, what tweaks or changes should we make? As this slide says, you could go one way, or you could go another way, or you could go that way. You might be hearing lots of voices, whether it's the TV or your spouse or your children. You might be hearing and seeing lots of different things, but I think that conversation and that collaboration with a trusted advisor to say, what should I do? Should I make a change now? Some might say when the stock market drops that things are on sale and now's a great time to buy. Oftentimes, though, the fear and the emotion leads you to believe maybe it's the opposite. Maybe you should sell. And so I think it's a time to assess what should you do, and going back to your goals, your priorities, and kind of that, are you on track? Should you make some slight changes in your asset allocation to maybe make you feel a little bit more comfortable, to maybe help you sleep a little bit? That's important in a time like this and in a time like the pandemic. We found this to be very comforting for our clients to have these kinds of conversations. The last question, which I think is important, and it's something that a lot of our clients and just people in general don't love talking about, is my house in order? What happens if, we're in Wisconsin, what happens if you get hit by that proverbial beer truck? Are you okay? What's going to happen in organizing your affairs? How have you documented your estate plan? Have you thought through all the conversations that you need to have with your spouse, with your children, with any other heirs? Alen talked a little bit about digital currency. That has changed that dynamic a little bit. Used to be that it was just your financial assets. Okay, is the house titled the right way? Are all my personal assets accounted for and titled the right way? And, a personal financial statement might tell you a lot of that. Jewelry, automobiles, art collections, whatever unique you might have, Packers memorabilia, whatever it might be. Used to be that was all tangible and you could really touch it. You get statements on your checking account, your savings account, your investment accounts, any retirement accounts you have. If you have any loans outstanding, you can account for all of that. Well, now, what if you have cryptocurrency? Who has the password? If you lose the password and you can't get in, it's gone. What about other personal family assets like videos or pictures that are on your phone? What about those types of things? And so thinking through, if I got hit by that proverbial beer truck, what would this look like? And how would I feel comfort that my spouse, my children, my grandchildren, whatever it may be, are going to be able to maintain and access the value that I've created during my life? And, simple things, estate planners and people like me have been telling you for years that, getting your wills and your trusts funded and done, that's all important. That's still all important. We just now have this digital component to think about too. I would encourage you to collaborate in these conversations. Surround yourself with strong advisors that you trust and have them work together. People ask me all the time, do we like working at a bank trust company and a private wealth group? Do we like working with attorneys and accountants? I say, yeah, absolutely. But when we're coordinated, we get better outcomes for our clients. And that's really what we're trying to do, is get good outcomes. So lastly, where are we going? I made this case for insight, collaboration, the listening. I think that's really critical. It's less formal than it used to be. We do this all the time with our clients. And it might be more frequent, shorter conversations than storing it up and waiting for that big meeting where clients find out a lot of information. We assume they have the information because they're looking at it digitally. They're aware of what's going on because they're getting news and information from all different sources. And so we're going to try to meet them where they are. Travel time has been cut down. We have clients that are Wisconsin clients that love to go to Florida, for example, or Arizona in the wintertime, and I don't blame them. And so rather than, sometimes we like to go down there and see them, but it's expensive and it's costly and you have to deal with airlines and all of that. Just hop on a quick Zoom call and just say, hey, this is what's going on. Let's address any concerns that you have. If you want to do any year-end gifting, if you want to do any transactions, we can do that. We're much more accessible than we used to be. And I think that that's of real value to clients. As we continue to evolve, I would just say it's really important that you work with advisors that ask a lot of questions, and that the goal should be in an advisor that they get to know you better than anyone else financially. They don't need to necessarily know what you had for breakfast or what socks you're wearing that day or anything like that. We'll save that for family or someone else. What we care about, though, is anything that impacts you financially. And so really understanding and trying to kind of think about you when you might not be thinking, like protect you from yourself, protect you from what's going on in the markets, making sure that everything's going to be okay. That kind of comfort is really important. We're continuing to evolve and adapt. We've learned a lot about technology. We wouldn't have been doing this 3 years ago, but we are now, and we're looking for the benefits, and we're looking to try to define success in the future in a different way. So I think that's all of what I was planning to say. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about the personal side of kind of how we've evolved in the future of banking. Happy to take any questions that you may have, and certainly field them towards Alen or myself, but I appreciate this opportunity.
I got at least one. I got a couple of them. is the like Zelle. I know that they're going through some updates in terms of what happens if somebody does get a hold of your account or you fraudulently send money to them. What is that like now? I mean, I know if you got a credit card transaction, it gets covered by your credit card company. But what about the cash out of your bank account?
Sure, yeah, I can take that one. So with Zelle, what's happening is that's called a credit push system. So for example, I'm pushing money to you, Kurt. And so it's critically important that the bank who is sending those funds knows who I am. And that's the main component. So the interesting thing is someone could impersonate me, and the bank that's sending that transaction needs to know who I am. So they'll probably put through more inquiries as to who am I and ensuring that transaction is correct. Ultimately, it doesn't react like a credit card. So once the funds are gone, you can put out a request to pull them back, but you ultimately, or the receiving bank isn't required to send them back.
Okay.
So I think it's critically important to proceed with caution, know who you're sending Zelle payments to, because once they're gone, they're gone.
And are banks responsible for refunding it or not? They're not at this point, right?
No, they're not at this point.
Okay.
So it's different. There's a regulation out there called Regulation E that covers electronic funds transfer. Zelle is outside of that right now. So it's a different payment rail.
And digital currency. So I know China had developed a digital currency and has been testing it out. I think that was the impetus for the Fed accelerating, right? Can you
Correct.
Can you explain why? I mean, my thought is we're the world's reserve currency, and we may lose that status, right?
You're absolutely right. It's definitely a competition, and China is working on it. So that's the main reason for the U.S. because the U.S. dollar is the standard in the industry, and everything's compared to it. So there's a big push by the U.S. government to get the digital currency up and running. I know they're testing it, and I was just at a conference a week ago, and they were talking about digital currency. It's still speculative right now. They're not exactly sure how it will work, but it is being focused on.
And you guys had an interesting perspective on cryptocurrency. I think a lot of people here, they heard about it. Bitcoin. There's multiple cryptocurrencies versus digital currencies, but which might want to just hit the difference between those two. But talk more about what your thoughts are on it, right?
Alan, do you want me to take that one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so from a bank perspective, while there's a lot of awareness that this is on people's minds, you watch CNBC and you see Bitcoin is quoted just like the S&P 500 today. But we've chosen because, well, there's actually a variety of different reasons. A big one is the regulatory impact. We've chosen to be a slow follower as it relates to crypto. From an investment perspective, we feel like there's just too much volatility. Most of the time, our clients come to us with their life savings, and we want to keep them rich, not necessarily get them rich. And so, cryptocurrency, Bitcoin can be viewed as being very speculative. And so while we're looking at it, we're monitoring it with our investment committee, we're not actively, as a fiduciary, making investments in cryptocurrency. And so that's been our approach from an investment perspective. And I would say it's a similar approach as it relates to banking. We're very aware, we're talking about it, we're learning about it, we're understanding, we're talking to our regulators as to what our competition and other banks in the industry are doing, but we're not wanting to be on the forefront. We're really wanting to be followers. Now, the interesting thing as it relates to what I talked about is we are going to be forced to deal with it as individuals pass away and we serve as a trustee of a bank. And we're going to have to figure out, as we serve as a trustee of their estate, is what I meant to say. We may be forced to understand, okay, what is this cryptocurrency that you have? What's its value? How are we going to pass this on to the next generation? What are we going to do with it? And so that is evolving. And I would say that that conversation changes. I mean, it's changed several times this year. And so we're talking to anyone that we can to learn more there, because it's a fast-paced environment. Alan, what would you add? Anything?
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's highly regulated. Well, not, I'm sorry, banks are highly regulated. And so it's a high risk transaction. So as a bank, we have chosen not to offer it up to our clients. There are ways where we could allow our clients to purchase crypto through our online banking, for example, but it's just too risky. So it's not something that we're interested in doing right now. We are here to protect our clients, and that's one of the ways we do it. Is this is speculative. That's the way we view it. That's partially my opinion, know that as well. Yeah. But it's just not something, because of the volatility, that we're interested in pursuing.
One additional thing that I would add, just one last point, would be that I would encourage our clients, though, to talk to us about it. If they hold cryptocurrency, we want to know about it. It's not as if that we're not comfortable with it as an organization. If we really want to get to know our clients better than anyone else financially, we want to know the whole client. And so it's not off limits per se. We just might not facilitate the transaction.
Besides the volatility, there are a couple of concerns that have emerged about cryptocurrency, and I wonder what your sense is of it. One is that cryptocurrency is a way of avoiding taxes, avoiding any kind of transparency or accountability, used a lot by the criminal element in our society. The other is that cryptocurrency, or maybe it is specific to Bitcoin, invites mining, which is incredibly energy consuming, and has really raised a lot of questions because in terms of the environmental effects.
Yeah, I can feel that one. This was a hot topic at the conference I was at a few weeks ago as well. So two things there, I think, to think about. One is the energy cost to mine Bitcoin in particular. It is the way they built the blockchain, which is behind the scenes, how it authenticates transactions. It's highly intensive and takes a lot of computer power to do it. Intentionally built that way. And so Bitcoin in particular is not energy efficient. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of computing power to do it. I heard there are also other cryptocurrencies out there that are doing it slightly differently, where it wouldn't take as much energy. So know that it's the behind the scenes, the way they authenticate the transaction, that's causing the energy consumption. So it can be changed. I know that they're looking at it. Other cryptocurrencies are looking at that. The second thing is really about fraud, and I would call the dark web component of Bitcoin. What's curious about this is the way a distributed ledger or blockchain would work is it's completely transparent. That's one of the beauties of this. If I log a transaction, someone else has to authenticate it, and it's forever recorded and visible. The trick is the fraudsters have figured out how to present themselves as someone other than who they are. So it doesn't matter that everyone can see it. So it's about how you enter into the blockchain. I think where we're going to go is how do we authenticate those individuals entering the blockchain? Because the blockchain itself is transparent to everyone and forever recorded. That's the beauty of the distributed ledger. So it's really about regulating how someone gets into the cryptocurrency, how they create their persona, and authenticating who they are.
And a couple of questions in the chat. One somebody's asking what the difference is, and this is a good question. What's the difference between what we have now with Zelle and Venmo and PayPal versus what the Fed's going to do with a digital currency? How is that different?
It's a great question. really, I think some of these are, I would call them payment rails, which means it's a way to facilitate a payment. So digital currency would replace cash. So I would say that's the difference. What's curious though is it will look like a payment a payment rail because you could use your phone to tap and make like a cash transaction. So I think of it this way: digital currency is replacing cash. Zelle is a payment mechanism to pay someone. So cash is a way to pay someone. So it's just a different payment rail.
Pretty subtle then.
Yeah, it is really subtle. And I think what we're going to see is even more payment options out there. So there's going to be lots of them, and I think there'll continue to be more. So it does really go to what's most beneficial to you and what's available to you through your bank.
Might be safer than, as we talked about Zelle. So it may be safer.
Correct. Yeah. And even with, Venmo is a great service, but if you have a trouble with your transaction, who do you call? You have to probably log on somewhere, try and find someone to help you if you have a dispute with Venmo. Different than going through your bank where you could dispute a transaction. So everything's great until it's not. So think about, like I said earlier, that in-person interaction. When you need someone, you want to talk to someone. So that's where a bank could be beneficial.
Another question here from, thanks, that was good. Another question here from somebody asking about the Treasury Direct. So how does that change for banks that you can buy T-bills directly from the Fed, right? Versus going through a bank to get them. How does that affect you?
Brendan, do you have any insight on that?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was assuming you were going to take that.
Yeah.
A lot of times what we're finding, especially in a rising rate environment like we're in today, where clients might not be happy with the rates they're getting on their bank accounts, their money markets. And so they're going to the idea of treasuries. And so Treasury Direct is one of those ways. Going through your financial advisor at a brokerage firm is another way. And so I think that's the nature of the question. Kurt, tell me if I'm missing a part of that.
Yeah. So you guys will still sell treasury bonds, right? You guys will work with somebody to buy them.
So we will hold. Correct. As part of the fixed income part of your portfolio, currently we're holding treasuries for many of our clients because of the way the yield curve looks today, especially being very short on the yield curve, can be very attractive. At the same point, we also are a bank. And so many of our clients might have CDs or money markets with us where it's a much different conversation today than it used to be. Used to be meaning 12 months ago, because rates have risen so quickly. And with the idea that, built into our expectations, just as a little nugget of information, in the next 4 months, we would anticipate that interest rates will be 1.25% to 1.5% better than where they are today. So, if 0.25% is 25 basis points, we're expecting 125 to 150 basis points increase in the next 4 months, based upon what we're hearing from the Fed, what we're pricing into the market, that kind of thing. So on the short term, treasuries are a great place to play that. Going to your bank and talking to them about their current rates, much more interesting today than it had been for the previous 10 years, where rates were next to nothing. To get 2 to 3 to even 4% for some of these vehicles today is much more realistic compared to you'd almost have to dabble in high yield bonds to get that kind of return a few years ago.
And I don't know if you can speak to this, but somebody's asking about, I think they're talking about remittances back. So with an immigrant population, right? They send money back home to a lot of, I know in Guatemala, I know about 14% of their GDP is remittances from people sending money back. How is it is that going to change, or has it changed at all in how people can do it with a digital currency or crypto or Venmo or any of these other?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there are any number of ways, especially within the North America and even South America, how to send money. And you can even, there's several different providers out there where they can transfer funds. With, for example, FedNow, which is the newest payment rail that's coming out next year. And there's another one out there called real-time payments from the clearinghouse, which is another payment rail. And those are instant payments, kind of like Zelle, just different behind the scenes payment mechanisms. They're both focusing on international transactions. So the thought would be you could pay someone in Mexico, for example, and instantaneously transfer it. That's where the future is going. I'm not sure that gets at the question, though. I think, is it questioning, is that possible in the future, or is it, how do we do it today?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. How do we do it today? I mean, I know from personal experience, there's a line in front of the bank to pick up the transfers, right?
Right.
On a Monday morning, or hell, any day of the week. And
then you can facilitate payments. I would call it internationally, outside of the U.S. in any number of ways. MoneyGram, Western Union, all of those offer ways to get cash to somewhere, for example, in South America, even into Europe.
And Dennis, we're coming up on time here. I don't know. There's a lot more questions I could have around that, but we're kind of coming up on time. I think, do you want to give people a little break between here and when Mark comes on? You're muted. You're muted.
I'm muted. Yeah, we could maybe go for another 5 minutes or so.
Okay.
And then, yeah.
Yeah, it's and you guys can read this one. Do you guys have access to the chat? There's a long.
Oh, yes.
This one's a little bit longer, but it's basically asking about testing the transactions, right? Have you see if you can pick that up? And while you're looking at, go for it. If you have.
I'm thinking when it's about a small deposit
to test
an external account. Yeah, and the system seems to set up to protect the entity making the test while keeping the account owner in the dark.
Yeah. I don't know if that's, I mean, yeah, you can explain what that is, I think.
Yeah. So there are ways when we're validating, I would call them external accounts, meaning accounts outside of our bank, for example. And you see this when you're setting up an account somewhere and you want to transfer funds to another account. They'll do what's called a micro deposit. So that, I think that's what they're talking about here. The person is, the initiating institution would send micro deposits, and you would then log in to that external account, confirm, oh yeah, it's 16 cents, yeah, it's 26 cents. You'd come back to where you started the transaction and authenticate. So that's an authentication method. And quite honestly, it's used more and more. And I'm wondering if there's some question about attempted fraud. I think you have to be owner of both accounts, because you have to know what's in that receiving account. Yeah. I suppose a fraudster could potentially, hack into both. Probably unlikely. In that case, I would just be vigilant about monitoring balances in your account to make sure someone isn't transferring funds without your knowledge.
And I know that when I was talking to a rep from your organization, they talked about bond rates being the worst they've been in since they started keeping track, right? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Bond rates, meaning ratings on bond funds, or deteriorating?
Just the returns on bonds.
Is that what we're talking about?
Returns on bonds.
Oh, bond rates. Okay, I thought you were
Yeah.
talking about like Moody's ratings or something
No,
like that.
no,
But
no.
the performance. Yes, and it kind of goes to what I was saying earlier. The Finance 101 theory might be that as interest rates go up, bond prices go down. That's just how the bond market works. And in 50 years, we haven't seen this fast of an increase in interest rates. And so as a result, particularly if you're in a bond mutual fund or an exchange traded fund that invests in bonds, because they're priced to market every day, those prices are going down because it reflects what's going on right now. But I want to be totally clear. If you hold individual bonds and you bought those bonds a year ago or 2 years ago, and you're holding those bonds to maturity, you're going to continue to get your rate of interest. You're going to continue to clip your coupon, as they say, until that bond matures. And you will get your par value back, unless there's some kind of default on the bond. You will get your par value back at the time of maturity. And so if you hold individual bonds, it's less of an issue, but your statement doesn't look very good right now. But if you're holding funds that are a combination of lots of different fixed income securities, you're seeing that value deteriorate, and as much as 15% this year, Kurt, which when you go to a place for safety, that's not what most of our clients are asking for.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I've got a question, and maybe we should make this the benediction here. We've talked about the changes that have taken place in banking. A lot of it, and it's been great, is from the consumer's perspective. What about from your perspective? Do you make money in a different way than you used to?
I can handle that if you want, Alen. We do. We're finding, and banks as a whole, if you're watching any of the earnings releases for the third quarter, we're going to report out our earnings this Friday, as an example. A Madison-based bank, FBIZ is our stock. What you're finding is that spread income, so that difference between the amount of money that we receive for making a loan and the amount of money that as a bank we pay to a depositor, that spread income is widening. And so while we're not necessarily knocking the cover off the ball relative to new deposits coming in, people are spending more money, or new loans, because loans, rates are higher on a loan today. If you came into a bank and tried to get a loan today, you might get quoted 6, 7, 8%. Where just a year ago, it might have been 2, 3, 4%. And so while we're not increasing volume, the spread, the margin is getting bigger across the system. And so we are making money in a different way. This is not forever, though. In an increased rate environment, this is what happens with banks. If we go into a recession, which we're feeling like we're there, if not close, that's my personal opinion. That's the opinion of First Business Bank. Things could change, and our margins might deteriorate. And we're going to have to be very aggressive in the future, potentially, to retain our clients. And so we're watching it closely. It's something that we talk about daily.
Good.
Well, thank you. Kurt,
Yep.
do you have any
I
final comments or questions?
don't. So
Okay.
thank you guys very much, though. It was,
Yeah, and you're more than welcome to stay on as we talk with Representative Pocan. But yeah, I think what we'll do is take a 2.5-minute break.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Have a
guys.
great day, everyone.
Okay.
And Dennis, you're going to let Mark in when he
Yeah.
shows up? Okay.
Right. can't.
Let me see. They can hear us. You know. Oh, okay. You know, everybody's showing. How do you do this?
Hey there, can you hear me?
We can. Yeah.
Hey, this is Mike Kelly. I'm a staffer for Mark Pocan. He just walked in. He should be on in just a minute here.
Oh, okay. Thanks very much.
Yeah, you bet.
You know, let's see what happens in here. There's
And I'm letting people in, Dennis. But I don't see Mark yet. So
Yeah, I don't see him yet either.
that question about remittances, that's an interesting one. I've spent a fair bit of time in Central America. First of all, that, like I said, it's I think it's 14% of the GDP in Guatemala is remittances.
Wow.
From people sending money back to their families.
That's considerable. Wow.
And it's expensive to send the cash back. Western Union, there's a fee there. I know there's some people working on using blockchain for doing that specific thing to get, because I don't remember what the cost is, but it can be 20%, up to 20% to send money.
Whoa, really?
Yep.
That's pretty high.
Yeah.
So what about if you use like Venmo or something like that? Same thing?
So there are ways there is a third party. There's another, it's called Zoom, but it's not like Z, it's XOOM. And that will do multi-currency. So it'll do US to foreign currency, but there's a penalty for doing it, right? I mean, they take a bite on terms of the exchange rate, and then they also take a fee.
Wow.
So, and that's owned by PayPal. Zoom is.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I've looked into it a little bit when I was traveling and working there. There's Mark. I will let him
There
in.
you
So,
go. Okay, so
I just admitted him, but I got to find him to make him.
Yeah, we need to make him a presenter.
Yeah. I don't think I can do that. I think you have to.
Okay, so is he?
You can search for him in the up above where the participant list is. Just type in.
Okay.
Yep, and then you'll find him.
I am on. Sorry about the 5-minute delay there.
Yeah, we've got you. We just got to make you presenter if you got any slides or anything like that.
No,
You don't. Oh, okay. Well, then,
Okay.
then we're good.
Yeah, then we're good. Yeah, well, welcome, Mark. Let's see. I think I also want to do one more thing here, which
I
is
did spotlight.
Oh, you did.
I
Okay,
did. Yep,
good.
I could do that, but I can't make it.
Okay, good. All right. Well, let me do a brief introduction here. And it's always tempting to say this is somebody who needs no introduction, but that's kind of, I always thought that was rude. So, Mark Pocan, as most of us, if not all of us know, is our representative to the United States Congress. Has served in that role since 2013. And before that, he was our representative for many of us in the state assembly. He's currently co-chair, I think, of the caucus, the LGBT Equity Caucus, was the co-chair of the Progressive Caucus. So he's not only our representative, but he's a leader within Congress. He and his husband are owners and operators of a printing company and live in Vermont. That is the town of Vermont, not the state. So, and I should just finally end up by saying that he was a fantastic student. Took a course that was just absolutely wonderful. It was the best course he ever took at the university, and he nailed it. So with that, Mark.
Thank you, Dennis. Yeah, I was going to be a magician until I took the course, so then I decided to go into politics. So then again, I know David Copperfield pretty well, and he's a billionaire, so I'm not sure if I should. Anyway, Dennis, it's great to see you. It's great to see everybody, and yes, for full disclosure, Dennis was a professor of mine, and I appreciate that, Dennis. And you going to UW, great instruction there, and great training for a lifetime, clearly, because here I am. It's great to be with everyone. I think I really want to leave most of the time just for Q&A. I just want to open up perhaps just by saying, this is my 10th year in Congress now. The district changed very slightly with redistricting because we grew so much. We had about 53,000 people more than the average district should be in Wisconsin. So we lost the city of Beloit. I used to have half of Rock County, not Janesville, but I did have Beloit. We lost Beloit to the 1st Congressional District, which is Brian Stiles' district. And then I lost just a little bit of rural northwestern Sauk County and 4 townships in Richland County to the 3rd Congressional District. So otherwise, very similar, Dane County, Sauk County, minus that little upper corner, Iowa County, Lafayette County, Greene County, and part of Rock County makes up the district. And I serve on the Appropriations Committee. The 3 subcommittees I'm on are the Labor, Human Services, Education Subcommittee, which is the 2nd biggest pool of money after defense, but most things the Democrats care about. I'm going to be 3rd ranking on that committee in the next session on the Democratic side. The chair of the committee actually being the chair of that subcommittee, so there's only one other person technically there. Also, I serve on the Financial and Other Government Services Subcommittee, which I believe if we do stay in the majority, I should be in line to be chair of that subcommittee in the next session. And then I serve on the Agriculture Subcommittee. So those are my 3 committees on appropriations. Obviously, it's much like the work I did on the Committee on Joint Finance in the legislature. I love that work. I think where you put your values is where you put your money. And then I also I have a waiver. That means I can't gain seniority on it, but I can serve on it, the Education and Labor Committee, which is interesting because that committee is the authorizing committee. So while appropriating does funds for things, authorizing writes the laws. And being able to do that, one of the few people in Congress who has overlap in doing an authorizing and appropriating committee for a couple subjects of labor and education is pretty awesome, because those are the 2 things I care about quite a bit. And then I also serve on the Joint Economic Committee, which is a joint committee by statute. There's 4 of them in Congress. So I serve with Ted Cruz, and I serve with House and Senate members of both parties on the Joint Economic Committee that largely looks at the economic future of the country. We don't really draft a lot of legislation, but we do reports. And that's kind of my day-to-day existence. And as Dennis said, I serve as the co-chair of the Equality Caucus. Actually, there are 9 of us who are co-chairs. However, There's usually one person who's the lead. David Cicilline was this session. Next session, I will be the lead for that caucus. So dealing with those issues nationally. I also formed a labor caucus that I co-chair and I'm very active in. And then I am the former co-chair of the Progressive Caucus, but I still co-chair the PAC on the political side for that. So that's some of what I'm doing. And I think with that, Dennis, I really just would rather open it up and answer questions and, see what we can have any conversations with folks.
One question that did come in the chat, and more questions are certainly welcome there, is what are the plans for being in session between now and the end of the year, calendar year?
Yeah, so it'll be a lame duck, so to speak, session. I think we are in the week after the election, and then for a week, and then we take a couple weeks off, and then we're back in for a few. But I don't believe the calendar at this time of year because we haven't done our appropriations bills. We did a continuing resolution to keep us funded till early December. But honestly, we want to get that done. There's a lot of good reasons other than the House Republicans that want to get it done. I think the Senate Republicans and Senate Democrats also want to get it done before the end of the year. But we've got to get that work done. So it could be a longer session, and I wouldn't rule out that we could be in between Christmas and New Year because of that as well. Because I have found if nothing else in 10 years that we only operate on deadlines, and sometimes even those have to be extended deadlines. So I'm guessing it's going to be a fairly robust period.
Another question that just came in, does the Progressive Caucus have second thoughts about the defund the police slogan that was used, particularly in the last go around in elections?
Yeah, so I mean, yes, that was 2 years ago, but also we're seeing some of that now, again, used completely out of context, because
Right.
I think there may be one member of Congress that I know of has actually said defund the police. Keep that in mind. You've fallen for a lot of commercials. You've seen millions of dollars of advertising telling you other things. I believe outside of Cori Bush, I'm not sure if anyone has actually said that there should be a defund the police movement. I could be wrong, but if we're talking out of 435 people, first of all, that's not the Progressive Caucus, and certainly that's not representative of any caucus in Congress if it's only a few folks that have actually said it. I think there have been talks during the Black Lives Matter protests that we should be, having policing done in some ways differently. In other words, does it make the most sense in a domestic violence dispute to send a police officer or to send a social worker? And those were talks that you saw happen around the country. But the actual defund the police is a great Republican campaign tactic that they've done quite well. Quite honestly, they're really good at that stuff. Abolish ICE was a little different because, ICE actually was a number of agencies broken up to create ICE, and ICE itself operated very poorly. But that was, once you're starting explaining, you're not, having a conversation. But again, that wasn't the Progressive Caucus that did that. But that issue has been 4 or 5 years ago. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's frustrating, I'm sure, to have the Republicans be so good at taking a slogan like that and using it out of context and using it against you. Any kind of strategy that seems to work relatively well?
Yeah, I'll tell you, the problem is they operate, Dennis, in so many ways without morals or values, right? It doesn't matter. It's the ends, the means are justified by the ends, period. And, they for example, in Mandela Barnes, they're taking mailers and darkening his skin when they send it out, right?
Right.
There is no moral compass to doing, right? That's purely racist and appealing to the worst in people. And yet that's what they're very good at doing. And, sometimes people want us to take the gloves off more, and so do I. I'll be blunt. I think sometimes we get too lost in policy and in the wording of policy rather than some of the bigger principles. Nancy Pelosi's always said, values unite, issues divide, and she's right. If you have the value that we should treat everyone with respect in policing, everyone would agree. But as soon as you say a certain bill or a certain set of words, you may not have that, right? That's the difference, but they're good at really manipulating that. And right now they're manipulating the border, inflation, and crime. And, it's interesting on all three, on the border, I mean, we actually had a bipartisan vote, my first session in Congress out of the Senate. I think it had 69 or 70 votes that would have had a pathway to citizenship for aspiring Americans and some additional protections at the border. And yet now you can't even talk about that thanks to Donald Trump. That's completely off the table. And yet they're blaming somehow Democrats on the border when there actually was a solution that had wide bipartisan support out there. On inflation, they want to blame Joe Biden, but clearly this is worldwide inflation. We have across the planet, every country. In fact, it's far worse in the EU right now. And that's not the problem of Joe Biden. It's a problem of having a pandemic that comes every century, and then things kind of reopening at once and not having supply from what was there. It's economics 101, if even 101, right, Dennis? That if you go and there's scarcity of a good, that's going to drive the cost up. But it's done it globally, and yet they're trying to say somehow that's Joe Biden. And then finally on crime, it's interesting because the crime rates are highest in red states than they are in blue areas. And yet they're somehow saying it's Democrats who don't run those areas and make the policy in those areas for crime. So they're effective at it. If you don't have a moral compass, it's a lot easier to save it.
Good point. The third congressional district in Wisconsin, I mean, all the projections are that it's going to go to Republicans, had been Democrats for quite some time. And the reports are also that the Democratic Party is not really investing very much in that race. Is that true? And is that a strategy that makes sense as far as you're concerned?
Yeah, absolutely not. It doesn't make any sense, but it is true that the National Party, because of the redistricting and there's so many gerrymandered maps, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, which is made up of Democratic members trying to get the majority, much of that money right now is going to saving incumbents in some of these gerrymandered and redistricted seats. And they get the priority, unfortunately, how they look at it. I would argue in the 3rd Congressional District, you have someone who actually attended the insurrection on his campaign account running for Congress, that should be something that raises the need to get some support, because we just don't have the money in Wisconsin. I've told the Democratic Congressional Committee chair, Sean Patrick Maloney from New York, that there's probably more campaign donors in 1 square mile of Manhattan than there are in the state of Wisconsin, right? So it's harder to raise money, flyover areas. I think they often look at us, and because it's not an incumbent, it's gotten a lower priority, and just the dollars are more limited. I mean, the Republicans this year had one guy alone who put in $1 billion with a B dollars, and because of that, that's been very difficult. So, Brad's trying. Brad Pfaff is the candidate. He's a great candidate, state senator, former Secretary of Agriculture, worked all his life in agricultural policy, would be great. But Derek Van Orden, the Republican who attended the insurrection, not only is lying about where he was at the insurrection, because there's photos and audio of him up on the Capitol grounds. By the way, one of the audio is Derek is up on the wall with the boys. I don't think they mean boys in the XY chromosome sense. I think they mean in the proud variety. That's one of the problems with this guy. But he won't debate Brad Pfaff, and he won't talk to reporters. So he's running purely on his commercials, but he's got 4 times the money. Well, you can kind of tell what's going to happen there pretty quickly. Unfortunately, even though I took your class, Dennis, I was a journalism major at the end for my actual degree. And I have to admit how frustrated I am that, even National AP did an article on the district and Derek wouldn't talk to him. So then they didn't really cover him. They covered more on Brad. And that's malpractice, journalistic malpractice. Just because the person won't talk to you, you can still write about him. In fact, they should punish the person more then only one side is going to define that person. And they haven't done that. So he's running a very stealth campaign, and it could turn out to be that I'm serving with an insurrectionist in a few months.
And he's not the only one.
No, the good news is Brad is working very hard. It is still a very important district. Wisconsin is on everyone's radar screens, from the governor's race to the Senate to the congressional race. It's just he is fighting with a deficit of financial support.
I'm a little bit surprised that more isn't being done in this race as well as some others to have candidates related to Trump sort of have Trump kind of around their neck, so to speak.
Yeah, it's odd. I mean, my whole theory of all this, Dennis, I was at the Mount Horeb High School talking to two classes this morning before this. That's why I was a little late and apologize. When they ask about some of these issues, they actually are more in tune in some ways, I think, than the political consultants, so to speak, or the political class and the pundits on this stuff. What's so odd is Trump is the power in the Republican Party right now. I mean, it truly, in many ways, operates more like a cult than a political party, because they don't even have a national platform right now, right? When Donald Trump was running for re-election, they decided not to have one, just whatever the dear leader said. Well, that's pretty strange for a national political party, and they kind of do whatever Donald Trump wants. And there was a moment around January 6th where everyone spoke the same, that he had brought all these people in that day, he had encouraged them to come down to the U.S. Capitol, and that he waited hours to actually deal with the what was unfolding on January 6th. And yet, people that day all said, Donald Trump was wrong in all this. A few weeks later, Kevin McCarthy, who will be the Republican speaker if they take the majority in the House, went down to Mar-a-Lago, kissed the ring, and kind of provide the forgiving that Donald Trump, I guess, needed. And everyone seems to want to rewrite what happened on January 6th. The problem is, by doing so, they've made Donald Trump the Republican Party, as opposed to a political party made up of people. And it's really very different. Among Republicans, Donald Trump still has enormous power. Among independents, it's dropped quite a bit. And Democrats, it's pretty close to non-existent. So while you think that might make some sense, the problem is, among Republicans, the reason why they give Donald Trump so much, I think, leeway is because he has control over the primary system. And so many of them are primaried and lost by Donald Trump supporting someone else. That's part of where the screw up we're in right now. So I do think that mentioning, Brad Paff, for example, is running, talking about the insurrection and what that means, and to the government. I think January 6th committee has done a very good job in stressing that, but you're not seeing it so much directly related to Trump as you are directly related to some of the times, like what happened on January 6th. And even that, you're not seeing as much. You're seeing it more in Wisconsin than a lot of places, because Ron Johnson, was potentially going to submit fake electors from Wisconsin to Vice President Pence, and that was part of the story. And we have an insurrectionist running for Congress. So we actually have probably more than most states talking about it.
If Kevin McCarthy becomes Speaker, he's made several statements that seem to indicate that he's not very supportive of the Ukraine. Is that an accurate reading, and what can be done to counter that?
Yeah, it's kind of a puzzling reading right now too, Dennis, because Democrats are unified in continuing to support what we're doing, which is, and let me actually take one step back. I think Dems and Republicans are largely supporting what we're doing, in that we're not sending U.S. troops, but we're supporting Ukraine. And you hear that from, I think, almost everyone in the Wisconsin delegation, those similar words. But all of a sudden, McCarthy came out with this saying that he may not continue to provide support, which is really kind of Marjorie Taylor Greene language. The Senate Republicans are where Democrats are. We understand we're going to continue to provide support. I think one thing, and I noticed someone asked this, and I just want to offer this up, because there was a letter yesterday that came out, that a little bit of context on this, that was signed by 30 people, including myself, but was written in July. And somehow it went out yesterday, which I am completely puzzled by, because, as you know, political years are like dog years. 3 months is a long time ago, especially in a war. And at the time, Putin was starting to talk about using nuclear force, and there were some hawkish voices starting to talk about more U.S. direct action. So we had a letter that we signed saying we support keep diplomacy on the table, which is what the Biden administration was doing, and trying to make sure that that was still prioritized. Why it came out now, I am puzzled, and that's part of what we're figuring out right now. And I've got the feeling there's going to be more to the story coming out today on this letter, because we were not consulted that it was going out, a 3-month-old letter, but it got misplayed by Washington Post. And again, as that journalism major, Dennis, I see so many things that bug me I always thought journalism was about getting it right, not fast. And Washington Post did a fast piece, kind of like you see out of some of the Capitol rags when they got to get a story out right away rather than detailed. And they said that we wrote a letter asking the president to shift policy. Now, I'll admit the timing, why that letter went out 3 months later, I don't know. And that was a mistake and it shouldn't have happened. But we didn't ask for anything different than what the president was doing in July, is keep that going. Don't get more involvement. Like, we didn't want to have direct US involvement. That means men and women going over there from the US fighting. And somehow they played it that we're doing this right after Kevin McCarthy made his rather insane comments about backing off of support for Ukraine. And I think a lot of confusion is out there. I can tell you, because we're getting some phone calls on it, and I've talked to a lot of reporters on it. But I think there's going to be something coming out later today that shows that that was a mistake, and the person who put that out never should have done that. But I say that only so people understand. We even in the letter expressed our support for Ukraine. We want to continue to do what we've been doing, is supporting Ukraine. We just wanted to make sure at that very specific time in July that we were not listening to some of the hawks that wanted to do something a little differently, because the president has done the right things, I think, and we're going to continue to support that.
Could you talk a bit about the Democratic Party and agricultural policy? As you know, the Democrats get a lot of criticism for not paying attention to rural areas and farmers. And you have some in your own district. So
a lot.
What about it?
Actually, you know what's interesting, Dennis? I heard this stat, and I got to track it down where I got it from. But Dane County's agricultural product is larger than 12 states. Agricultural product, right? That's just Dane County, much less the rest of my district, much less the rest of the state. So you're absolutely right. The big bill that'll be coming is the Farm Bill reauthorization again, and that always is where everything all the activity kind of happens. Being on the agricultural subcommittee for appropriations is a little different than that, because we don't write the policy of it. That's done by the authorizing committee, which is the agricultural committee. We then do the appropriating for that. So just so people understand, I don't have a direct involvement as much as if I was on the committee on it. However, that will be the big bill. And, I've always been a bit amazed, because Democrats' policies have often been around things like, I have an anti-corporate merger bill on farming that's, I think, pretty strongly supported by actual farmers. We're fortunate we still have a lot of family farms in Wisconsin versus other states where these CAFOs, these corporate big farms, have taken over. And we want to make sure any policy can kind of continue like that. But Republicans often are supporting those largest farming operations that are really mega corporations that care a little less about the food we eat than they do the profit that the corporations make, including resilient companies in beef that have a very substantial imprint here in the United States that were terrible during COVID to the workers working the meat processing. So, absolutely, that Farm Bill is going to be crucial and important. And that is one of the things that will happen through Congress very soon. Whether it's this year, I don't think so. I think by very soon, I mean in the early part of next year.
So yesterday, yet again, we have school shootings. Is there anything that Congress can do about that?
Yeah, so we just did a bill that helped on a couple ways, from red flag laws and some other things we wanted to get done, which, again, given what's passed through Congress, that one was very substantial. We've passed other things out of the House that only go to the Senate to die. And let's have this conversation real quick, and I'll come back to the full answer. But this always comes up, Dennis, and that's the issue of the filibuster. So we've passed a lot of bills, including gun violence legislation, labor legislation, codifying Roe into law, other things that go to the Senate only to die because of the rather strange rules and procedures they follow. The filibuster, unless a matter is fiscal in nature, you can do that then with a simple majority. Almost everything else takes 60 votes because of the filibuster rules. The filibuster rules were not given to us by our founding fathers. They came in a couple decades later when they realized they had no way to stop debate in the Senate, and they've changed a number of times throughout history. But let's remember that was still the late 1790s when the fundamentals of the filibuster came in place, that were invented, and given to us by people who wore white powdered wigs to work. I'm not saying there aren't still people who wear wigs to work in the Senate. There are, but not the white powdered variety. It's been a long time. We haven't kind of given a modern update and look at the filibuster. And I think that is desperately needed, because right now it's changed over time. In the 50s, it was used for a lot of segregationist policies. Now it's used largely by an obstruction tool by the minority. And, you know, when I was in the local government county board, simple majority prevailed on almost everything. In the legislature, simple majority prevailed on almost everything. In Congress, the House, simple majority prevails on almost everything. The Senate, it doesn't. And I think at some point, if it's just going to be used as obstruction, that's a problem. And at least it should be, at minimum, revamped and perhaps even considering getting rid of it. A lot of debate can happen on that, but I just don't think it's working in its current process, in its current form.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, but
Okay.
back, what was the first
Yeah.
part? I want to come back to it. Was it on no, not on agriculture. It was on guns.
School shooting.
Yeah. So yes, there's more we should do. I mean, the no-brainers that we did try to pass out of the House were around background checks. Over 80% of the people support that. You get a background check if you go to a gun shop, a brick and mortar business. But if you buy it off of Craigslist and you meet a person in a parking lot with a bag of cash, there's no background check. I mean, clearly that is a loophole that should be taken care of. More of these red flag laws to make it harder for some people to get guns should be enforced, and that we did pass as well. There's more that should happen. What's an outlier, and we talked about this morning at the class in high school too, is that our country is very, guns are a very, very big part of much of our society. And while I don't think anyone is going after the hunting rifle or even the handgun for personal protection, just the sheer number of guns that we have out there and the crimes affiliated with it are incomparable to almost any other nation on the planet. And that tells me we're doing something wrong and we've got to do something different. And I think that's the challenge, because the gun lobby, really it's the gun manufacturer lobby, is very strong, especially among the Republican Party, and that makes it more difficult.
Yeah, and I might note that the gun lobby is really, as you point out, the gun companies more than it is grassroots. I mean, the NRA sort of conveys itself as if it's a grassroots organization, but it's really sponsored by and funded by the gun lobby.
Yes.
Gun companies. Let me ask a follow-up on the Ukraine issue that I've been persuaded to or encouraged to ask you. That is about NATO membership generally, but also specifically for Ukraine. So the Democratic Party talked about that. Is there support for the Ukraine becoming a member of NATO?
I don't think there's a party position on it. I think, you know, if I had to guess, this is purely a gut check on this, Dennis, a majority of members would be supportive of it. I'm not necessarily persuaded by the argument that countries bordering on Russia shouldn't be in NATO. I don't think that was ever a concept of NATO and shouldn't be a qualifier or disqualifier, where some people might. But I do think that, you know, we have that alliance for a reason, and, you know, people should be able to submit for membership based on the principles within NATO. And there's some other countries as well looking at it that are in some cases bordering Russia. I do think that, you know, what we've seen has shown a bit of a realignment, I think, in some ways. I don't think people realize Russia was as weak as it is. And Ukraine has done, I think, an amazing job internally. I think having a young leader like Zelensky, who's been very dynamic, has been very powerful for what's happened there. And I think our support has been very necessary and supported. But the NATO question, I know that, you know, some people are afraid that that somehow instigates Russia. But as far as I'm concerned, what Russia's done goes beyond any instigation. I mean, they're invading a country. They're committing, I think, war crimes. I think they have a price to pay, and Vladimir Putin in particular, for what's happening.
Is there a concern about the Ukraine joining NATO, and then that would trigger off, I don't mean to use that word, boots on the ground in terms of US involvement?
I don't know if any decision like that necessarily happens in the middle of a war, right? That may not be the right time, but I'm just saying in general of who's involved in NATO, I think there is a process, and that should always be looked at for other countries that might qualify and be interested. But I don't think the denial should simply be by their proximity, I guess. Where we're at right now, I mean, you know, how wars end are almost always through some diplomatic efforts towards the end, right? That's why we always say keep diplomacy on there. It's not about who runs out of people or weapons first. It's always something else that kind of ultimately gets us there. And I think we need to continue the support we're doing, but whether or not NATO membership happens during this, I don't know. I mean, a lot of this, how long is this going for, right? We're not quite sure. Although I think, Russia is certainly having their own issues through going through what they're going through.
Mhm. A kind of a twofold question. One that I'm sure you were anticipating is just what's your thinking about what's going to happen in a couple of weeks? And related to that is Mandela Barnes has really been the victim of a lot of negative advertising. Anything that you would advise that he do to counter that? Is it too late?
Yeah. So first of all, Wisconsin's a very purple state, right? And it's not because we have a lot of purple areas. We have a lot of red areas and we have a lot of blue areas. And overall, that makes us a purple state. So turnout is still the biggest factor in a midterm, where you don't usually have as many people voting as you do in a presidential term. In a presidential cycle, generally, we do a little better. We're a little more blue as a state, just ever so little, but we are. The question is what happens in the midterm and, with issues like inflation and things like that, but also issues like Roe versus Wade. So what happens on that? I had wished that maybe a month earlier, they would have ran more comparison ads with Ron Johnson, because in my opinion, Ron has given us many things to vote against him for, whether it be in one of the debates, he talked about eliminating the minimum wage altogether. I think that's a pretty extremist position. He has said that we should put Social Security into discretionary spending, which means every single year it's on the chopping block. I mean, even the Republican Study Committee, a pretty conservative element of the Republican Party, has said to do that every 5 years. Ron wants to do it every year. I think that's pretty extreme as a position. His solution to the jobs crisis is that people in retirement should come out of retirement, fill those jobs. I think that's a pretty extreme position coming out of Ron Johnson. COVID, he said that what mouthwash could kill COVID. And what other ideas did he have when he was chair of the committee at the time? Were pretty out of the mainstream and pretty extreme. I think he's given us a lot. I mean, the 1,000 jobs we should have had in the Fox Valley, and then he didn't do anything to try to save them. And he said we already have enough jobs. I don't know of any politician who ever says we have enough jobs, right? And I'm just getting warmed up on the Ron Johnson list. So, I wish that they would have ran those ads earlier. I'm quite confident that Mandela Barnes can make a hell of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich right now. But I don't think I needed to see it that many more times. I think we needed to have some of that. They're doing it now. And I do think also that we're seeing some real, the last poll I saw just yesterday, he was down 1. I think that Marquette poll might have been a little bit of an outlier, the down 6. I haven't seen anything else like that. So it's going to come down to turnout, really. I think Mandela is a very, very qualified, extremely bright candidate. I was one of the first people to back him for lieutenant governor when he did that, because I knew his legislative record, and I've always been impressed by him. Not only does he come from where the average person in Wisconsin comes from economically, but also, kind of a different generationally. We need some of that, I think, in Washington. And, I still think it's a possible election. I just, I had been advising to do some of this a little earlier, and it didn't get taken, but hopefully now we're getting a lot of attention. Barack Obama's coming, Elizabeth Warren's coming tomorrow, as is Secretary Walsh, the Secretary from Labor, coming tomorrow. Secretary Buttigieg is coming the next day. I think you're going to keep seeing Cory Booker, I know, is coming to Milwaukee. You're going to have a lot of attention on Wisconsin in these final weeks. And then, just remember November 9th, at least you won't have to watch another political commercial for a while.
Do you know what's happening with voter turnout efforts? Is there I assume that there's a nice ground roots organization and effort that's being made, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, there's a lot going on. And trust me, again, at the high school, I'm going to give you this example, but one of the things they ask people to do is put some hours in to help politically or an issue or anything you care about in this class. And she did some calls for a candidate this weekend, and she was talking about it. And I said, yeah, it's great to identify who's voting. The most important part is getting them out to vote, because if they don't vote, it doesn't matter if they agree with you. We know in general people agree with Democrats, but if they don't come out and vote, then that's another issue. My concern, Dennis, is quite honestly college campuses. I was on 7 campuses a couple of weeks ago in 1 week, 6 in the 3rd CD, and then UW-Madison. And 2 years ago, COVID disrupted how we did everything on campuses, right? You didn't have the normal political operation in 2020. So you don't have people who did it in 2020 now here to do it in 2022. And in many ways, you're reinventing it because of the turnover with students and their ages and how they, age out. And because of that, I am worried. Bernie Sanders is going to be coming to Wisconsin, and I've been talking to him a bit, and we're getting him up to some of the campuses, because I think that's the important part where he can help the most. But in the 3rd congressional district, just as an example, 2% of the vote comes from the college campuses. There's about as many undergraduates with the 6 campuses in the 3rd district as there are on the UW-Madison campus. So that's a lot of votes. There could be a lot of swing, and a lot of those generational issues on choice and things like that. We know where students are at. So that's my biggest concern right now. Is I think in general, we've got a lot of efforts to get out the vote in what traditionally is a lower turnout cycle. But I'm a bit concerned on campuses, and trying to work with folks doing some efforts around that.
Interesting.
Because there's 300,000, I think, undergraduate students, something like that in Wisconsin. That's a big block of votes.
Yeah, it sure is. Wow. Well, as you remember, I'm sure, from the course that you took from me, I pointed out that Ronald Reagan was very successful at doing 2 things. One, driving up the deficit for the first time in U.S. history, and having a legacy of the federal government being in debt, and convincing people, because of his advocating for things like a balanced budget at the federal government, that the Republicans were really against the federal deficit and federal debt. Seems to be something that's continuing. Yes, sort of.
Absolutely. I mean, talk about doublespeak, right? I mean, you've got the Republican tax cut that 86% of the money by the end of it goes to the top 1%. That tax cut, the several $1 trillion tax cut they did in the last administration. And yet then they talk about, some of the spending we did on COVID and what it's adding, when actually in, for example, the Inflation Reduction Act, we reduced the deficit, right? We've got efforts. You see Democrats always doing this. Republicans drive debts and deficits up. We try to bring them down as Democrats. And that is the actual history. But again, they're so good at the spin, just like they were on defund the police, acting as if it was a mainstream, political leader thought. When I think I've heard one person say it. They've done this also around spending and spending reductions. And my big worry is I think there is a very serious effort coming on Social Security and Medicare. And my biggest, I think it's the biggest mistake of this cycle is Democrats have not focused on this issue more, period, because we can easily extend the life of Social Security by just simply lifting the cap at which you pay your Social Security tax. Because right now it's at 146,000 this year, I think it is, where you quit paying another dime into it. It's kind of a regressive tax. But doing that, but also, there's a bill, the 21st Century or Social Security 2100, I think, Act by John Larson that I'm a big fan of. Not only does that lifts the cap on people making more than 400,000, also does extends the CPI benefit, instead goes to the CPI-E, which is the consumer spending that more seniors spend money on, things like medicines rather than gasoline. So you get a boost in money for people who really need it the most, who are many living on Social Security. And also it would lift the income cap that you could make and still get your Social Security, because that hasn't been adjusted from the 18,500 for quite a while. So it really would revamp Social Security and keep it alive. But the Republicans, just the opposite. The Republican Study Committee, a major entity within the Republican Party, wants to have us every 5 years review that. Well, the difference between that and most spending is it's your money that you've paid in through your paycheck, and we have a promise to hold it until you need it, but not a promise to steal from it. And that's kind of what they're proposing. So the fact that we didn't make this a more significant issue I think has been a huge mistake.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. Yeah, good point. The January 6th committee, I think, has probably exceeded expectations in terms of the effectiveness of their hearings and the way that they have presented evidence and called in various witnesses, actually relying very heavily on Republicans to provide the testimony. If the Republicans get the majority after the elections, what's likely to happen, and anything that you're doing, you and others are doing to kind of anticipate that?
Yeah, so I think their formal hearings are kind of done, although they're still collecting information because still information is coming forward. I think they've done a good job in connecting many of the dots that were out there. My fear is that if the Republicans take over, they may keep the committee going, they may not, but they'll use it instead to go after Hunter Biden's laptop, an oldie but a goodie, and things like that. Marjorie Taylor Greene introduced, I think, on like one of her first days in office this year, something to impeach President Biden, right? I think they might try to do something like that. I mean, there's going to be a whole bunch of things and that don't make any sense. So that would be the trade-off I think they would see. Also, I just got an email. I just want to add this because I couldn't quite say it directly, but that letter that unfortunately Washington Post kind of misrepresented around Ukraine, the person who put the letter out just withdrew the letter and explained that it was a mistake that it went out now. It was a July letter and all the stuff that I just told you, the reporter didn't bother, by the way, to call any of us who signed the letter to ask that, which again,
Wow.
Dennis, I tell you, the new crop of people doing some of the Capitol newspapers have no journalistic background and they're writing stuff. And I had to once call someone, she had a story with 5 unnamed sources and no named sources. And I'm like,
Ooh.
that's not in our journalistic standards. You can't do that. But anyway, this, the letter, the person who put it out, Pramila Jayapal, has just said it's been withdrawn because it never should have gone out. And again, it was appropriate for the time we did it, but a lot about nothing in the end. But I did want to put that out there because people, especially Washington Post, were saying that we were changing policy, and that never was what the letter was. In fact, what's interesting is the Progressive Caucus has had the president's back more this session than any other group. During Build Back Better, we were the ones who kept meeting with the president, trying to get Build Back Better done and having his back in the room that he needed to try to continue negotiations with Joe Manchin. And it's a little frustrating then when something like this happens, but you get a chance to see it live in the making right here. So.
Somebody sent a question about the Democratic Party and midterm elections, and the focus was, is the Democratic Party as a national party, do they draw up a platform? Is there a strategy, tactics, anything that's done at the national level?
Not at the midterms, really. We have like a retreat at the beginning of every session, and you kind of go through and you talk about a lot of the issues that you want to put out there. There's a communications committee that meets throughout the year, and you've got all your committee chairs and all that. I'll tell you that is one thing. That's why when we had our messaging for this year, it was people over politics, because it's true. They're all doing MAGA politics and these gotchas. We've been passing, the American Rescue Plan that put money in people's pockets and got shots in people's arms, got kids back to school safely, got money to state and local governments for the first time, got some people into jobs. Then we passed the infrastructure bill, right? 4 presidents have talked about infrastructure. We did something, over $1 trillion, going to create 1.5 million jobs, invest in roads and bridges, broadband, water delivery systems, 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations, et cetera. Then this year we passed the CHIPS Act, Chips and Science Act, that's going to have more computer chips made here. We only make about 12% of the chips we use here in the United States. Usually we have a 45-day supply. We were down to a 4-day supply on a regular basis, which is not something we can have. So that we're now going to have those made here. In fact, that may be the most consequential of the bills for long term, because it's going to help incentivize more things to be made here like that we learned through COVID we needed to. And then finally, the Inflation Reduction Act. And that's allowed us to reduce healthcare costs and energy costs via a number of measures, including trying to have a reduction in emissions of 40% by 2030, the most significant we've had bill ever passed through Congress. But on healthcare, especially for I think a lot of people here, it's allowing us to now negotiate for prescription drug prices through Medicare using our volume purchasing. It's huge. I mean, that's going to really reduce costs. Also, it caps out-of-pocket expenses for seniors at no more than $2,000, which is very, very important. And it capped insulin at $35. We wanted to cap it for everybody. We were only able, because the Republicans, to do it through Medicare. But all that's in that bill. So all of those are huge bills. Now, is there a strategic plan other than we put out our first 10 bills of the session and then you kind of go from there? That's generally how we lead a session. That's what we did the last two, I think, something more like that. But there's not like a national messaging in the way that you might expect. I mean, towards election time a little more, but that's why I said like Social Security actually came out of some of the folks that we worked with on messaging, and then somehow it didn't fully make it, because when you only have a margin of 4 seats in the House, if 4 people for that matter, don't like a bill for whatever reason, it's dead. I think that was some of our difficulty, but we still could have contrasted with what the Republicans were going to do to Social Security.
Mm-hmm. And actually, the last couple of years, not only the House, but the president has been very productive, incredibly productive. But that's not the general perception. General perception is that nothing's happened, that President Biden has been totally ineffective, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the picture.
Yeah,
that's frustrating.
There's 4 bills I just mentioned. Any one of them would have been the biggest bill of a prior session. And we did 4 of them in one session with a 4-seat margin in the House and a 50-50 Senate, right? Like, talk about, a fine stringing of a needle, right? And getting all that done. Let me share this anecdote. And I don't know if I did it last year. If I did, I apologize. I'm resharing stories. But, last fall, when we were doing Build Back Better, I had a number of opportunities to be in the Oval Office with a small group of members, like 10 members and the president, for a couple hours at a time, talking through, trying to get that done. And what was amazing is, again, the Republicans, as I mentioned before, I think sometimes lack any moral compass when they do some of the attacks that they do. And this is a classic example. They often go after your strengths and try to make it a weakness. So Joe Biden is obviously very plugged into policy because he's been in the Senate for a very long time. And that was one of his issues that he was known for, right? Was able to get things done, work cross aisle, et cetera. In a 2.25-hour meeting we had around Build Back the Better, he talked through the policy of it and answered every question for 2.25 hours with one question. He had to go to his staff to get a detail of it figured out. But he knows that stuff because it was his agenda and he believed in it. And, he fell off his bike. Well, fine, put Donald Trump on a bike, right? I mean, let's be real here, right? And I think that's, part of what, if there's a reason to hate politics, and there are unfortunately many reasons to hate politics, Dennis, is how people do that. Like, could you imagine Coke and Pepsi running ads, this will rot your teeth and your tongue and whatever, like, no one does this. And yet in politics, that is what you see. That's why I can't wait till November 9th for TV to not have to watch these anymore. But on this, like, destroying a man's character for what actually is one of his strengths, I find very morally repulsive. And one of the reasons that, as much as I love my daytime job, one of the reasons why sometimes, Dennis, it's a little hard to fully embrace it in the way that perhaps you'd like to.
Yeah. And would you again sort of point a finger at journalism and modern day coverage?
A lot of it is there. It's about getting it fast, not getting it right. And social media is a big part of that. So even broader than just your traditional journalism, it's social media. Right. And then Donald Trump brilliantly, made this about the lies of the media, and you can't trust the media. And he brilliantly manipulated one of our institutions that we did rely on to have that even playing field. And, you add that on top of then the getting it fast, not correct stuff. And it is a challenge then, because, and the other thing is just the fact that people get the media they want to see. So when you're on Facebook, for example, the algorithm will only show you what you want to see and you never have to see any opposing views. And I think that's a problem too, because then people really are getting, messaging is a bit more extreme in making of how people think and look at stuff, because they think everyone must think this because that's all they see. And that doesn't help. And there, I think we need some probably antitrust work with some of these large social media platforms to try to get that resolved.
This morning, I was reading some of the British newspapers and their observation about politics right now in the United States is that the Republican Party is talking a lot about working for the working class and the middle class. And the comment of the British observers is that, well, but that's not the party that's actually been at the forefront of dealing with issues of the middle class and the working class. We just got a comment in through the chat that kind of says the same thing, faults Democrats for being concerned about policy issues, the arguments, the nuances, and letting the Republicans pretty much have a free sway in terms of saying that they're the spokespeople for the middle class, up working class.
Yeah, I'll tell you, and the other development I've seen, Dennis, that's really interesting, we've seen especially in the 3rd district, but I've seen it across the country, and I've been traveling. Last week I was in Iowa and a couple districts in Nebraska. I was in New York. I've been getting around, I try to help out as part of what I consider my job to be. And when you look at their candidates won't even debate, and they're avoiding any venue where they could be brought into a comparison. I mean, I guess Ron Johnson and Tim Michaels credit that they at least did a debate in one case and 2 in the other. But in many of these areas, we're not seeing even debates anymore. And, they just want to run on their advertising. And I'm seeing some disturbing things that worry me, and also on campaign finance too. We've had a rise of, even in Democratic primaries, some crypto billionaires putting in money. In one case, 14 million into a single congressional race, and they lost it, spent it well, but they put a lot of other money in races. And also, front groups for certain causes, like there's a group that claims they're on behalf of Israel, but they're actually for a pretty Republican position on it, raised money from Republicans and spent it in Democratic primaries. And, when you start to see billions of dollars come in that are more than the candidates raise and spend on their own races, especially in primaries where money is not at the level it is in a general, I'm a little worried about what bodes for the future if we don't get a hand on campaign finance reform. I think Russ Feingold was right about worrying about that issue all those years ago. And I'm getting to the point that, we could really, this is getting really close to being out of our grip.
Yeah, it raises another whole concern, which is the Supreme Court, which is the one that really kind of pretty much took care of the McCain-Feingold reforms and said that no, there's the First Amendment, and just took that all that legislation and flushed it down the toilet.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we should let you go, but there's one more comment that I'd like you to respond to, her invitation actually, and that is in the past when you've talked, you've made mention of some of the Republicans that you've been able to work with, that it's despite the sort of general image that we have of polarization, that there are some people that you've been able to reach across the aisle with and work effectively with. Wondering who would you give a shout out to on that side?
Yeah, so there still is that, and I think it's good to end on a positive note too, because there are the Marjorie Taylor Greens, which are worse than I've ever seen in an elected body. But she's not even on a committee, and she doesn't even care to be, right? They're there for media and raising money. Matt Gaetz is 2 doors down from me. Same thing. He goes to one elevator bank. I go to another elevator bank because I don't want to get it on me. I'm not sure what it is, but he's not serious about governing. So why bother? I'm lucky because on appropriations, with almost no exception, the Republicans on the committee are your traditional Republicans. We can disagree on policy, but we understand our job is to spend the nation's money, and we have to do that. And you work together. And in the Wisconsin delegation in particular, an odd bedfellow, but Glenn Grothman has been surprisingly great to work with. He and I have some strong divides on a number of issues, but he respects the institution. You can have a conversation with him. He's not angling for the next office, because that's often a problem. And he's not part of that crop of the new folks that are coming under Trump that, are this MAGA, I guess, extreme, you refer to it. So, I can appreciate a traditional conservative, and there are people I still work with, Robert Adderholt on my, committees on appropriations, and others that are just, good people, and we still are friends and talk. But the problem is, if Kevin McCarthy becomes the leader and they have a 10-seat margin, I don't know how they govern, because of the Marjorie Taylor Greens and things like that. It certainly won't be because of reasonable Republicans. It's going to be that extreme element that's going to be there, and that could be a problem. But on the day-to-day, we absolutely still have a lot of stuff that functions. It's not sexy to put on the news. You don't sell detergent by saying Dems and Republicans work together and pass X or Y. But it is more challenging. I mean, just the fact that all the attention goes to the Marjorie Taylor Greens and Matt Gaetz's, makes it appear that is everything. And more of them are getting elected. I will absolutely say that. But fortunately, we still have, a footprint of folks in both parties that are there to work together. And that's what we have to do.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you very much. I know you've got a very busy schedule, and we really appreciate taking the time and sharing your insights.
No problem. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. And again, Dennis, thank you as always. Take care.
Sure. Yep.
Later.
So long.
Bye now.
Hey, Dennis. That was
Hey, Kurt.
good. That was really good.
Yeah. He's good guy, good representative.
Yeah,
He learned well.
Thank you for setting it up.
Okay, so next week we are meeting with Christian Overlord, who is the executive director of the Wisconsin Historical Society, and he's going to be sharing some exciting plans that they have that are really going to not only help the society, but how the square down in downtown Madison is going to be looking. So we'll look forward to that. And voting starts today. So if you want to vote now, go for it.